Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the first show of 2012, and what a show it's going to be. You are listening to Paranormal Review Radio. This is one of your co-hosts, Anthony Agati, broadcasting from New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfried, broadcasting from the Windy City of Chicago. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year from all of us at Paranormal Review Radio. Tonight is going to be an explosive night on the show, and we want to make sure that you, the listener, are able to join in the conversation. We have a lot of information to cover, so we hope to get to the calls. The phone lines are open. The number 661-244-9831. Or if we're not able to get to the phones, we will be monitoring the chat room and watching out for questions or comments. So share with us your thoughts tonight in the chat room.
Thanks, Lucy. You know, we said on our last broadcast that 2012 was going to be different for the show. We were going to push the envelope on paranormal topics and review things that you might not have heard before or been aware of. Well, I hope tonight we fulfill that promise. Tonight's show is special to me. I've always been fascinated with UFOs and aliens. I've never seen them or come in contact, but the theory behind it and the evidence that I have reviewed over the last 15 years only intrigues me even more. You know, to answer the question, do I believe in UFOs and aliens? Yes. Yes, sir, you bet I do, and I can prove it. Lucy, I want to pose that question to you. Do you believe in UFOs and aliens?
You know, as a paranormal investigator, I try to keep an open mind when it comes to the unknown. UFOs are a part of that unknown. I have seen so many things in media, in print, on TV, on YouTube. I don't necessarily believe in some of what is out there, but there are too many reports of occurrences, too many accounts of sightings and experiences to dismiss the notion that there is life somewhere else in this universe. There are too many things out there that they all have the same makeup. In my opinion, it is highly unlikely that many people would have the same type of experiences, not to think that there is some truth to what they report. Furthermore, if life on other planets is a real thing, why would we have the nerve to assume that those forms of life would not venture to this planet? Whatever the reason they would visit our world, how could we say, no, it's not true? As a species, we have always explored, we've always searched, we've always questioned what else is out there on our planet. We only have to look at Columbus, at Magellan, Sir Francis Drake. Man has always searched for wealth, power, and prestige. So why would inhabitants of other worlds not do the same? Anthony, why don't we begin by giving our listeners who are not completely familiar with UFOs and aliens a little history lesson? And let's begin with when UFOs first started being recorded in history.
Okay, Lucy. Skeptics like to say that UFO sightings are only as much as our modern society makes them. Nowadays, people see flying saucers made of metal, whereas in the 1800s, they were made of wood. They say the shapes have evolved over time and that UFO sightings are overplayed by the media, causing an even greater number of sightings. Nowadays, we have photos and video, both black and white, that show weird objects in the sky. Many times, the UFO sightings are not by one person in the wilderness, but by thousands of people in a metropolitan area. One thing we can be sure of is the fact that UFO sightings are not new to the 20th century. They've been happening since the ancient times. Although there are other ancient writings and myths that could be included here, I've narrowed it down to 3 that hold a little more significance. The first recorded UFO sightings was on a rock carving. The first recorded UFO sighting I have found so far dates all the way back to about 47,000 years ago. Not too far away. On an island in the Hunan province of China, there appeared cylindrical objects, cigar-shaped spacecrafts, and their weird, possibly extraterrestrial occupants carved into a granite mountain on some rocks. I can't find a picture of the carvings for the life of me. If somebody knows where I can find one, let me know. The first written UFO account. As mentioned before, there are several other candidates for the first written account, which can probably be assigned to ancient Sumerian texts. But this one I find more along the lines of an unknown object in the sky. It was found on an Egyptian papyrus during the reign of Thutmose III, 1504 to 1450 BC. In the year 22 of the 3rd month of winter, 6th hour of the day, the scribes of the House of Life found it was a circle of fire that was coming in the sky. It had no head. The breath of its mouth had a foul odor. Its body 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. It had no voice. Their hearts became confused through it. Then they laid themselves on their bellies. They went to the Pharaoh to report it. His Majesty ordered, all which is written in the papyrus rolls of the House of Life. His Majesty was meditating upon what happened. Now, after some days had passed, these things became more numerous in the skies than ever. They shone more in the sky than the brightness of the sun, and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of the heavens. Powerful was the position of the fire circles. The army of the Pharaoh looked on with him in their midst. It was after supper. Thereupon these fire circles ascended higher in the sky towards the south. The Pharaoh caused incense to be brought to make peace on earth. And what happened was ordered by the Pharaoh to be written in the annals of the House of Life, so that it be remembered forever. Now, the first official investigation was done by military, can be attributed to Japan in the year 1235. On the night of September 24th, General Yoritsumi and his army observed some mysterious lights in the sky. The lights were seen for many hours, circling, swinging, and moving in loops. The general ordered a full-scale scientific investigation of the lights. The report he received did nothing but explain away the phenomenon. The whole thing is completely natural, General. It is only the wind making the stars sway. That was their explanation at that time. Lucy,
That's
you there?
That's it. We just can't give them the history of UFOs. Here, let me talk about in more detail. The history of aliens and UFOs is shrouded in mystery. Who and what are they? Where do they come from, and why are they here? We'll look at some of the subjects that make up this elusive mystery. First, let's go back to the Bible. In the Old Testament, Ezekiel talked about a wheel in the sky. This is in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 1 through 28. Ezekiel, being of limited technical knowledge, tried to describe what he was seeing in terms that he, as well as others of his time, were able to understand. He described his vision as a whirlwind coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and brightness was all around it and radiating out of its midst, like the color of amber, out of the midst of fire. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds a lot like the UFO reports that have been noted all throughout history. A bright, fiery light in the sky coming out of the clouds. Ezekiel goes on to describe things. From within came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Okay, so far it looks like Ezekiel is seeing another humanoid creature. Then he describes the vehicle that they arrived in. Now, as I looked at the living creatures, behold, a wheel was on the earth besides each living creature with its 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their workings was like the color of beryl, and all 4 had the same likeness. The appearance of their workings was, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Sounds like a UFO to you? It sure does to me. Now, let's not forget that the Old Testament prophet Elijah, who ascended into heaven on a chariot of fire. Also, there's strong evidence that the Bible's ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, next to the Dead Sea, were destroyed by a nuclear explosion. Sand samples found in Iraq next to the Dead Sea resemble those that were created by an atomic bomb. The Sumerians in 4000 BC experienced an alignment of the planets during their millennium, and they believed that extraterrestrials were from Mars. The star system Pleiades, the star Sirius. Sumerian texts also depict drawings of the solar system. In 2500 BC, the Hindu religion began in India. The Drona Parva, a Sanskrit text, describes aerial dogfights among gods piloting machines they call Vimanas. The Arthashastra of Kautilya, 3rd century BC, mentions among various tradesmen and technocrats the Sabikas as pilots conducting vehicles in the sky. Also, the Vamika Shastra refers to about 97 works and authorities of yore, which at least 20 works deal with the mechanism of aerial flying machines, but none of these works is now traceable. The Yuki Kalpataru of Boja includes a reference to aerial cars in verses 48 through 50. Some say the image looks a lot like today's space shuttle. In 2000 BC, the Incas in Peru said that gods were from the Pleiades, just as the Sumerians believed. Very interesting. Now, here's something else interesting that I discovered during my research for this article. It was believed that the Vimanas, or flying cars, were said to have followed a route over the Western Sea. This would have been over the Arabian Sea, Africa, the Atlantic Ocean, Latin America, and Mexico. This would have been the shortest route. Now, most of the cargo ships, however, had to follow a longer route, which went over the Pacific Ocean via Indonesia, Polynesia, Latin America, and Mexico. This was because of the favorable trade winds and the equatorial currents, which made the navigation easier. Here's the kicker, though. The Nazca lines of Peru may have been a form of navigation for these trade routes. Yes, very thought-provoking. This does make me wonder if the old folklore about the flying carpets of Persia are actually not folklore, but fact. The Romans saw flying shields. In fact, Alexander the Great and his army was repeatedly harassed by 2 flying shields. The Persians saw flying carpets. The Assyrians saw flying bulls. The Greeks and Arabs saw flying horses. Ancient Egypt had their encounters with huge fiery circles that appeared in the evening sky. The Indians had their Vimanas and flying war machines. They actually discussed these things during their city planning meetings. The Chinese have always had their luminous and fiery dragons. Okay, so this one is a little far-fetched for me, but I'm going to read it for you. It appears that a civilization will always try to match what they see to what they're used to seeing in an attempt to describe the event. For instance, the Immaculate Conception of Jesus could have been a product of alien interbreeding, meaning they didn't understand how a virgin could conceive a child. In fact, Joseph, to whom Mary was promised to, was suspicious at first. But it was soon accepted that it was an angel of the Lord that approached her and told her of the infant to be born of her loins. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, it says, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." In almost all of the ancient texts, there are references to giants. In the Bible, they were called Nephilim, or those who came from the sky, or giants. Could the Nephilim have visited Mary on that night? Upon the crucifixion of Jesus, he arose from the dead and ascended into heaven. In 1000 AD, the Mayans called the extraterrestrials masters of the stars. On board the Santa Maria, one of Columbus's sailors spies a glittering thing in the distance. Now, this could have been Venus, depending upon what time of year it was, what direction he was facing, or even what time of day or evening it was. In Old England, in 1290, Yorkshire peasants spotted a silver disk in the heavens. In 1561 and 1566, residents of Nuremberg, Germany, and Basel, Switzerland, observed spears, disks, and tubes flying about in the skies overhead. In 1600, maps from Istanbul clearly show Antarctica under the ice. Now, this is something that only a satellite or sonar can detect today. In 1716, British astronomer Edmund Halley observed some unexplained aerial displays by unidentified objects. On November 17, 1896, an object described as an electric arc lamp was spotted over Sacramento, California, by hundreds of people. In the following months, strange lights in the sky were being reported all across America. Some of the objects spotted were described as searchlights, colored lights, balls of lights, and light wheels, and they were all attached to a large, mysterious dark object that sounded like an airship. Now remember, dirigibles were not invented until 1900 in Germany. In 1908, an unexplained nuclear explosion occurred in Tunguska, Siberia, before the atom bomb was even invented. Now, some theorize that Nikola Tesla had something to do with this, but will we ever know the truth behind this one? Probably not. During World War II, pilots on both sides had reported the observance of bright lights in the sky flying next to them. Each side thought it was a secret weapon from the other side. Enemies, not ghosts. They called them Foo Fighters. In 1947, an alleged UFO crash in the New Mexico desert near Roswell, and UFOlogy was born. Strong evidence begins to present itself regarding extraterrestrial life. The government of the United States, to this day, vehemently denies any knowledge of a recovered down UFO with occupants. Now, if this is so, then why did they whisk away the pieces of wreckage and refuse to let anyone examine it? Not to mention the numerous threats to people's lives by men in black suits and cars if they were to talk about the incident. On June 24, 1947, Kenneth Arnold observes a squadron of UFOs flying over Mount Rainier in Washington State while flying his private aircraft. The photos in the story became very famous. On September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, were driving home from Canada through the White Mountains and encountered a UFO and aliens. This became the very first report of alien abduction. Since then, thousands have occurred over the years. In the early part of the 20th century, there were just a handful of UFO sightings. In the middle part of the 20th century, there were dozens reported. But now, in the early part of the 21st century, there are thousands reported every year. In 1969, Earth enters the space age and becomes extraterrestrial beings ourselves by visiting the moon. Science fiction becomes reality. Recently, some very spectacular multiple sighting events have occurred. One of these is known as the Phoenix Lights event of March 13, 1997. The UFO filmed over China and Israel in the last year has also sparked new interest in the UFO community.
In addition to all of that, Lucy, there are numerous paintings and ancient art that depicts UFOs, like the one that's called the Baptism of Christ, which is in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, England. It was painted in 1710 by a Flemish artist, Art de Gelder, and it depicts a classic hovering silvery saucer-shaped UFO shining beams of light down on John the Baptist and Jesus. What could have inspired the artist to combine these two subjects in 1710? Another one is the Madonna with St. Giovannino. And I think I actually talked about this in a previous show. Above Mary's left shoulder is a shining or glowing disc-shaped object. A man and his dog can clearly be seen looking up at the floating object in the composite. This was painted in the 15th century. Palazzo Vecchio lists the artist as unknown, although attributed to the Lippi school. And another one is the painting that's called the Annunciation, and it was painted by Carlo Crivelli in 1486, and it's on display at the National Gallery in London. A familiar dish-shaped object is shining a beam of light through the house wall and down onto the top of Mary's head. Much activity is going on in this painting besides people pointing. It's also filled with cryptic symbolism, the meanings lost to modern researchers. There are countless others, but we just don't have the time to get into all of them on tonight's show.
Anthony, now that we've discussed the history of UFOs in ancient times, can we get to the heart of what tonight's show is all about? I feel like getting into some trouble tonight.
Yeah, let's definitely get into some trouble tonight. You know, when I was doing my research and watching the number of videos from the media and news outlets, I noticed that a majority of the media on national television seem to poke fun at the idea of UFOs and don't really take the account seriously. I mean, why is that? Why is it okay to discuss religion beliefs and ethics and controversial differences between them and not UFOs or aliens? Why is it that the national media outlets can talk about miracle stories on Christmas Day and hint at the fact that God or Jesus played a part in it without any proof of it being a miracle, and not okay to discuss the thousands and thousands of UFO evidence that has been presented and preserved over the last hundreds of years? Is it because the government is dictating what our media should and should not discuss? Is there a mass cover-up that the government has created? Well, we're going to delve into this idea and expose some of the truths that the government has been lying to us and that we are actually paying them to do it. Yes, that's right. We are paying them to lie to us with our tax dollars.
That's a very serious accusation, Anthony, but I think we're on the right track. And I know that there are going to be some people who say that we are just making all this up and that we are part of the quote-unquote wacky group of conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, I know. There will be people that say that, but you know what? I don't care. We have done the research and found out that the government has been hiding things from us when it comes to UFOs and visits from aliens, and I want to be able to present the evidence for it so that others can agree or debate it. Sorry, I'm getting a little heated there, Lucy.
Well, the evidence we found is amazing, and I know it will cause our listeners to question things.
All right, so I want to start off by discussing technological advancements over the years, like the computer and the toaster.
Really? A toaster?
Well, not the toaster, but technology innovations that have been invented over the years since the early 1900s. This I found to be the most interesting and conclusive evidence that something happened after 1947 in this country. But first, I need to discuss the Roswell incident. I'm sure everyone has heard of the Roswell UFO crash of 1947. If not, I'm going to briefly review it. In the summer of 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, eyewitness reports of a UFO crashed into a ranch field. The news media reported a flying saucer crash, but was quickly told the next day that it was a weather balloon that had fallen into the field. For more than 30 years, the story was forgotten and not discussed until physicist and ufologist Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Jesse Marcel, who was directly involved in the recovery of this quote, weather balloon in 1947. Now, Major Marcel admitted there was a military cover-up because they felt the world could not handle the truth at the time. He also admitted to recovering material from the crash and studying the technology that was on the spacecraft. Now, be that as that may, the UFO crash of 1947 was only the spark. And what I mean by that is that the crash at Roswell has shaped and helped create the technological innovations we use today, even right now over the Internet and on your computer. Everyone out there right now has been touching and using alien technology. Let's review technology innovations pre-1940s and then after 1947, and you be the judge. Between 1910 and 1920, such innovations like the electrical ignition automobile, motorized movie cameras, radio tuners, and pop-up toasters were invented. Between 1920 and 1930, the traffic signal was invented, television, the car radio. Between 1930 and 1940, advancements in the jet engine, Polaroid photography, radio telescope, tape recorder, photocopier. Pretty basic, pretty simple, not too technologically advanced. Now, between 1940 and 1960, we see a jump. The electrical digital computer was invented, the microwave oven, the atomic bomb, computer hard disk, mobile phones, computer modem, the microchip, and the orbital satellite. We move from tape recorder invention from the 1930s to computer hard drives and microchips in the 1950s. How can we advance so far in technology in only 20 years? So just how do we make such vast technological advancements in such a short time? How much of this technology was reverse engineered from recovered alien aircraft? In 1947, AT&T Bell Labs was awarded a contract by the then President Harry Truman for overseeing and management of the nuclear arsenal, as well as the commercialization of derived technologies, including the nuclear bomb, the physics, the electronics, control systems, the radar that was used, and the ICBM technology under development derived from the Nazi V rockets. These projects were conducted under the highest security for obvious reasons. However, they were also under the control of the Z division, which originated from the original 509 bomb group based in Roswell, a division which was also presumed to be involved with the recovery of alien aircraft. Now, this may be a coincidence, but it was in late 1947, November 17th to be exact, Walter Britton invented the transistor, the single most important discovery of the 20th century. An interesting fact is that in 1947, the materials required to create a transistor did not exist. There is no way that silicon of the required conductivity would exist in nature, and the silicon has to undergo a process known as infusion, whereby the silicon is combined with another element in order to increase or decrease the number of electrons. This process requires a high level of technology that wasn't available at the time. The transistor technology itself was way beyond that of the time. Although several devices were described in the past, none were ever built or tested. United States Army Colonel Philip J. Corso wrote a book in 1997, a year before his death, called The Day After Roswell. And in it, Colonel Corso claims that he was assigned to a secret government program that provided some material recovered from crashed spacecraft to private industry, without saying where the items came from, to reverse engineer them for corporate use. The book contends that several aspects of modern technology, such as fiber optics and computer chips, were developed by using information taken from the craft. Why should we believe Colonel Corso? He was a well-respected, highly decorated military employee. He was an intelligence officer and spy for the U.S. and a trusted advisor to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He knew things that most people in the government or the military did not know. Now, I want to share an audio clip that I found online from the History Channel that outlines the discoveries that Corso was involved with and what role he played in, with the help of the Roswell crash site evidence, that innovated technology we use today. You will hear from Corso himself during an interview that was conducted in 1996, a year before his death, and also narrates from Bill Burns, who I'm sure folks will know who Bill Burns is. He's a leading ufologist, and he's the host of UFO Hunters. So take a listen to this.
By the end of the summer of 1961, he maintains that he begins to contact military weapons labs about his alien artifacts.
Now, the Army laboratories also had civilian scientists there, and they developed this relationship of handling classified material. Phil Corso felt very comfortable working through the Army laboratories to the civilian scientists because the clearances were all taken care of by the laboratory.
America is dotted with top-secret high-tech labs where civilian scientists work on sensitive military projects. Los Alamos, home of the Manhattan Project, is perhaps the most famous. But in 1961, Fort Belvoir in Virginia is quietly working on a decade-long project to develop night vision engineering. Corso claims he makes this lab the first he approaches with alien technology.
In order to get these things reverse engineered properly, you couldn't just take this to a Radio Shack. I mean, it had to go to a place where somebody would understand the technology.
According to Corso, Roswell eyewitnesses report that the alien craft has image-intensifying technology. If one went inside the ship and looked out, the world outside would look as bright as day, even at night. There is also, according to Corso, a lens taken out of an alien's eye that has light-enhancing properties. No one knows how the two are related, says Corso, but he knows their potential value. Corso maintains that by the late summer of 1961, he helps researchers at Fort Belvoir by showing them the alien light-enhancing lens and possibly other light-enhancing technology from the Roswell craft.
This was a kind of technology that, although we think we have a very clear line of development going back to the Second World War, we take a look at how this technology has literally geometrically exploded over the years. Now, can this be attributed to this technology that was picked up at Roswell, according to Corso? Well, according to him, it can be.
Corso says he wasn't able to further develop the alien mind control interface. His theory was that it would only function with an alien brain. But this momentary setback, he claims, didn't forestall development of another Roswell artifact, an imprinted circuit of mysterious design.
We also had a little charred chip. Small thing, maybe 3/8 of an inch, square, two threads coming out, and a little one in the center with thin wires. These came from Roswell. We didn't know exactly the function of these integrated circuits, but we suspected that these were circuits, electrical circuits.
Corso asserts that he brings the object to Bell Labs, which had developed the transistor 14 years earlier. He says scientists there were able to analyze and later recreate the alien microchip.
What would happen if something like that were to occur? Well, what would happen is, in a very short time, the world would be transformed radically.
There's no doubt that after the development of the integrated circuit in the early 1960s, the world is transformed. Electronic devices from the cell phone to the laptop computer become reality. Corso claims the Roswell microchip was supposedly damaged from the crash, but that in his possession is another alien object, this one apparently fully functioning.
He knows from reports that when people were shining this thing around, it caused burning on the surfaces that it was aimed at.
Corso says he reads classified military reports speculating that the artifact from Roswell, apparently capable of burning holes in walls, is some kind of cutting tool, perhaps used for surgery. At Hughes Aircraft, from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, researchers have been working on what would become the first laser tracking and targeting devices for military aircraft. But engineers have run into a snag in their efforts to create a practical device. That is, Corso asserts, until he shows them the alien cutting tool.
It did accelerate after 1960-61 because people figured out new ways to make lasers. And as the science advanced, the engineering advanced.
Corso's filing cabinet reportedly contains another treasure from the Roswell trove.
It was glass tubes, and they emitted different color lights, and those were sent to Bell Laboratories. From that was one of the greatest advancements I think we have today, came out in fiber optics.
Many UFO researchers theorize that the spacecraft had no wiring because it was fitted instead with fiber optic cable. Transmitting information with light happens to be an old technology. It dates back to one of the pioneers of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, who experimented with a device he called the photophone in 1880.
Most people have never heard of it, but back in his day, serious scientists thought that the photophone was a more impressive invention than the telephone. The photophone was a way that you could transmit a voice signal over a beam of light.
Corso's research tells him that data transmission via light had failed because scientists could not direct a beam of light around corners. But Corso contends that the Roswell artifacts might hold the answer.
They were looking at this glass fibers and saying, wow, the light actually turns a corner. How can light go in curves? And then they concluded the reason for that was because it had a cladding wrap on it. The cladding was the key discovery you had to make in order to make fiber optics work.
Although it would not be until the 1970s that fiber optics were in general use, UFO researchers believed that the cladding wrap on the alien artifact, an outer covering on the fiber that guided the light, made it possible for earthly fiber optics to advance. Corso also says he examined some curious super strong fibers that his military reports claim come from the aliens' flight suits.
The first thing of the fabric that amazed me was a thread that I couldn't cut with a razor blade. Just a thread.
In his book, Corso offers a theory about the fibers composing the alien flight suits.
The alien bodies, probably the more vulnerable aspects, were protected from what had to be incredible energies by the super tenacity of the fabric, which somehow formed a shield. And Corso said they didn't put these on, they were woven around them. In other words, they spun them like a cocoon.
According to Corso, he wonders if these super strong fibers could be developed into super strong bulletproof shields for law enforcement and military use.
Corso said that the Army tried to bring it to the University of Colorado to try and fabricate this technology.
The mid-1960s saw great advances in super strong fabrics that used polymer technology, the type of molecules that Corso claimed were present in his alien fabric. In 1965, Kevlar was invented, a fabric that would be used in bulletproof vests. More proof, according to Corso, of the impact of alien technology. There's no denying that the period Corso works in the Pentagon coincides with a period of rapid technological growth in the United States. Corso's supporters say alien technology played a role.
That's an amazing clip, Anthony. But you know what? I have some stuff here that I think will help blow the lid off the idea that this thing that fell from the sky was not a weather balloon or a secret military airplane. If what crashed was a weather balloon, there would have been no need for secrecy. According to testimony, military officers admonished subordinates and civilians not to talk about what they saw. If what crashed was a weather balloon, Major Marcel would have recognized the material Mac Brazel showed him as weather balloon material and would have not journeyed far out on a remote sheep ranch with an officer from the Counterintelligence Corps to examine the crash site. The wreckage described by Marcel and others was too voluminous and spread out over too large an area to have been the wreckage of a crashed weather balloon. There is no reason the Army would have transported the wreckage of the weather balloon from the remote desert outside Kelowna, first to Roswell Air Force Base, and then on to Fort Worth Air Force Base. Most of the witnesses who saw or handled the wreckage would have recognized the remains of a crashed weather balloon. If what crashed was any kind of secret military apparatus, one would expect at least some of the pieces would have recognizable letters or numbers on them. Many of the witnesses say that some of the wreckage bore a very strange kind of writing, but not one witness has said that any of the wreckage bore any recognizable symbols. If what crashed was any kind of secret military apparatus, the Army would have simply said, "This is secret, and no more questions will be answered, period." The Army would not have concocted the flying saucer and weather balloon stories. In 1947, Americans were less skeptical about the motives of the government, and the people of New Mexico, including journalists and other civilians, were dependent for their livelihood on secret military projects. Now, if what crashed was any kind of secret military apparatus, the Army would not have waited for a rancher to inform them of the crash before sending military personnel to examine the wreckage 5 days after the crash. Rockets and airplanes that were secret in 1947 are not secret now. If what crashed was a secret rocket or airplane, it would have been revealed as such years ago. Incredibly, the Army is sticking to its weather balloon story, even though nobody believes it anymore. By July 1947, rockets launched from the White Sands were fitted with self-destruct mechanisms so that an errant rocket could be destroyed before leaving the test range. The Corona crash site is about 75 miles from the nearest border of that test range. They did not fly secret airplanes in New Mexico in 1947. There was plenty of room for that in California, where all the secret airplane projects were carried on. There is no reason the Army would transport the wreckage of a crashed rocket or airplane to Fort Worth Air Force Base, then to Wright Air Force Base in Ohio. The wreckage of a secret rocket would have stayed in New Mexico, and the wreckage of a secret airplane would be sent back to California, if anywhere. Finally, most of the witnesses who saw or handled the wreckage would have recognized the remains of a crashed rocket or an airplane.
Great facts, Lucy. I want to keep the momentum going and stay on the attack of the government. We're going to get into more detail about the government UFO cover-ups even further, but we have to start slow before speeding up. Let's suppose no one believes in the Roswell incident, or even UFOs for that matter. Take that idea out of the equation, and let's get to what really matters here. Has the government ever conducted cover-up scandals on anything? Well, let's see. Tuskegee syphilis study ongoing from 1932 to 1972 knowingly killed hundreds of low-income African-American men. U.S. Public Health Services wanted to experiment with the effects of untreated syphilis on low-income African-American men were lured into study with promise of free health care. Instead, they were intentionally lied to and given placebo treatments. Even when they could have easily been saved by penicillin, they were left to die for the benefit of the syphilis study program. M-Culture is a CIA experiment where drugs were given to Americans without their knowledge or consent. This involved giving LSD, marijuana, barbiturates, heroin, mescaline, alcohol, and more to unsuspecting people. Started in 1950 to study mind control and behavior modification. In 1973, Richard Helms, head of the CIA, deliberately destroyed all the documents. Operation Mockingbird was a CIA project created to control the domestic and foreign media beginning in the 1950s. They bribed well-known writers and journalists to write slanted propaganda. The goal was primarily to bribe writers to write about the dangers of communism and suppress any left-wing political writing. In 1976, George H.W. Bush, the new director of the CIA, announced that this activity will stop, but they would welcome the voluntary unpaid cooperation of writers. Project Shad was created by the United States Department of Defense in 1962. They intentionally exposed our military personnel with biological and chemical agents on 46 different occasions. This was done without the military personnel knowledge or consent. They wanted to experiment on how soldiers can be exposed to dangerous chemicals and continue to fight. This testing was conducted from 1962 to 1973. The Department of Defense refused to admit SHAD existed until 1998. These are just a few cases that are available to the public out of the hundreds and hundreds of cases where the government had been caught or confessed to internal cover-up and conspiracies. Keep listening to the news, and I'm sure 2012 will be the year when truths are revealed. But we are not stopping here, Lucy.
No, we can't stop here. We haven't even discussed the UFO cover-ups.
No, we haven't. Let's start that review.
Okay. To be honest, the U.S. government was not completely against the idea that aliens or UFOs could be visiting the planet. Our government did create projects and studies to further investigate some of the reports, but as quickly as they created these programs, they were just as quickly closed. I want to reveal the 6 major studies that were headed by our country's military and government sectors. So the first one is Project Sign. Project Sign was the first U.S. Air Force investigation of UFOs. It lasted from January 1948 to April 1949. Based at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, it collected several hundred sighting reports from government and non-government sources and claimed to explain most of them. Due to its unwillingness to accept UFO reports not sent directly to it, the Project Sign files include only a few dozen reports from 1947, while newspapers received more than 1,500 reports in just 2 weeks. Next is Project Grudge. Project Grudge replaced Project Sign in April 1949. In December 1949, a magazine article on UFOs written by the famous aviation writer Donald Keyhoe, based on his private investigation and military contracts, elicited enormous media attention. In it, Keyhoe insisted that UFOs were alien spacecraft and that the U.S. government was keeping this knowledge secret. In response to the furor that Keyhoe's article caused, and to demonstrate that there was nothing to get excited about, the Air Force reduced Project Grudge to a routine intelligence effort. However, in October 1951, Project Grudge was returned to its original status as a special project. This investigation ended in March 1952. The final report suggested that most sightings had been explained. However, a large percentage of the reports were left either unexplained or only conditionally explained. And now, the most infamous project of them all, Project Blue Book. The final open U.S. Air Force UFO investigation took over from Project Grudge in 1952, and it lasted until December 1969. By this time, almost 13,000 sighting reports had been collected by all 3 projects combined. Approximately 600 to 700 cases remained unexplained. Now, this depended on which Air Force statistics were accepted. However, it is notable that hundreds of other cases have been labeled as explained without adequate justification and often in ways counter to known facts. The thousands of reports received conditional explanations, such as possible balloon, probable aircraft. But when the annual statistics were compiled, the qualifiers were dropped, and possible balloons would become definite balloons, as if speculative answers were established facts. The project closed down in late 1969, concluding that the continuation of Project Blue Book cannot be justified either on the grounds of national security or in the interest of science. A panel of the National Academy of Sciences concluded in these views, and the Air Force has found no reason to question this conclusion. The memorandum recommending this action made it clear that the system, which had long dealt with reports of UFOs, could affect national security would continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designed for this purpose, namely as it had all along. Separately, not part of the Blue Book system, and in accordance with JANAP 146 or Air Force Manual 55-11. At the end of Project Blue Book, its case files were open to the public inspection at the Air Force Archives. They were withdrawn in 1974 to reappear in 1976 in the U.S. National Archives after the names of all the witnesses had been censored, thus preventing reinvestigation of the cases. Now, after Project Blue Book came Project Stork. In late 1952, Project Blue Book director Captain Edward J. Ruppelt ordered a study of all the cases in the files from 1947 to 1952 under a contract with the Battelle Memorial Institute. The data was supplied to the Air Force, while the conclusions were those of the Battelle scientists. The Air Force issued the final report as Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14. It was released in 1955, accompanied by an Air Force news release. Although the Air Force stated that their own conclusion that there was nothing to warrant interest or concern, this was contrary to the conclusions of the Battelle study. The Battelle scientists had stated that almost 2,000 reports that were deemed to have sufficient information to prevent an analysis, 22.8% were judged to be unexplained. Another 31.3% were judged to be doubtfully explained. In total, therefore, 54% of the sightings were said to have lacked convincing explanations. Next, we have the Robertson panel. In July 1952, a major sighting wave occurred, and Air Force jet interceptors chased UFOs all over the country. Around Washington, D.C., UFOs were tracked by several radar installations simultaneously, and they were seen visually from the air and the ground. The Central Intelligence Agency apparently became concerned that whether UFOs were real or not, the reports might clog the nation's intelligence channels, allowing an enemy attack undetected. In January 1953, the CIA convened a panel of scientists chaired by H.P. Robertson. He was a scientist at Caltech to look at some of the government's UFO data. The scientists were briefed by an Air Force team. After 3 days, the panel concluded that its original concern was correct, but that there was no convincing evidence that the UFOs themselves were a threat to national security. The panel's recommendation that the government treat UFOs more openly was never implemented. Now, many are not aware of this one, the Condon Committee. By the mid-1960s, the Air Force was becoming increasingly embarrassed by its poorly thought-out public statements on the UFOs, which were highly criticized by the public. After congressional hearings that were held in response to public complaints, the plans were begun to have one or more of the universities review the Air Force project and study the UFO situation independently. Eventually, the Air Force Office of Scientific Research gave a grant to the University of Colorado for a study to be headed by Dr. Edward U. Condon. From the very beginning, the project was under a cloud of suspicion due to Dr. Condon openly expressing his views in public forums that UFOs were nonsense. A letter was discovered in the project files in which a prominent leader of the study suggested to university officials that skeptical scientists could be disarmed by assuring them that the study would only appear to be an objective one, and that the researchers were not expecting to find anything significant in any case. Recently, further documentation has been found that makes it clear that the Air Force was encouraging the university to help them justify closing down Project Blue Book and abandoning open UFO studies. In early 1969, the $500,000 study was completed, and the public received a strangely conflicting report, reminiscent of the conflicting Air Force Battelle statements 15 years earlier. Dr. Condon dismissed UFOs, reporting that they were without substance or significance. In the body of the report, however, more than 30% of the cases were left without satisfactory explanation. In some instances, the University of Colorado scientists made it clear that they were completely baffled by many things, such as sightings, which visual observations were confirmed by radar tracking. Finally, Project Mogul. In July 1947, something crashed on a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico, giving rise to the long-term controversy. Was it an alien spacecraft or a weather balloon as claimed by the U.S. government? At first, the U.S. Army Air Force said that it had recovered the remains of a crashed flying disc, which was an early term for UFOs. This explanation was soon changed to a weather balloon, which remained the official position for several decades. Witnesses interviewed long after the fact described debris of several types, including the metallic materials of extreme strength and very lightweight. They also tell of extraordinarily high security in connection with the recovery and shipment of a large quantity of debris, and in some versions, alien bodies from the crash site. In 1994, the U.S. Air Force announced that, in fact, the debris was from a cluster of balloons being tested for a long-secret project called Project Mogul, and designed to detect nuclear explosions within the Soviet Union. In 1995, the Air Force published an exhaustive 1,000-page report documenting the Mogul balloon project, purporting to prove that the Mogul explanation for Roswell. Once again, the Air Force summarily concludes conflict with the information in the body of the report. The data clearly indicates that only the test balloon clusters that conceivably could have landed at the ranch near Roswell were never tracked, and so that their landing sites remain unknown. Moreover, the balloons consisted of only familiar materials, not exotic metals, and would have quickly decomposed in the hot sun. The balloon clusters were held together by a braided line. The debris described by witnesses at the scene included neither braided line nor standard balloon material.
Thanks, Lucy, for outlining the major studies. But what is the official statement from the government or military regarding UFOs and aliens today?
Well, as of tonight, the White House officially denies the existence of extraterrestrial life forms from other planets or the existence of life forms visiting or interacting with humans on this planet.
Typical. I wouldn't expect anything more or less. I wanted to introduce a couple of pieces of documents that I was able to gather in my research. I have with me right now in my hands 4 different pieces of documents, a couple of memorandums, and I actually have an excerpt from the Air Force Regulations and Policies and Procedures Manual, and it's an excerpt in regards to the section where it talks about regulations governing the UFO investigation. But I want to get to some of the documents that I have first. The first one that I have is dated September 23rd, 1947. This is a government document. It is from Nathan Twining, who was a 3-star general and I think later on became a 4-star general in the Army. And Nathan Twining wrote this memorandum to the commanding general of the Army Air Forces, Brigadier General George Shulgin. And in the document, it's probably about 2.5 pages long, but in the document, there's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight from here. In the section 2 of it, he quotes his opinion, and it is the opinion that the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. There are objects probably approximating the shape of a disk of such appreciable size as to appear to be large or as man-made aircraft. He also goes on to talk about a couple of, actually 6 characteristics. I guess he was reporting at that time, or was within one of those 6 major groups that you were just outlining, Lucy. And here's what he says. The reported operating characteristics such as extreme rates of climb, maneuverability, particularly in a roll, and action which must be considered evasive when sighted or contacted by friendly aircraft and radar, lend belief to the possibility that some of the objects are controlled either manually, automatically, or remotely. And he goes into talking about 6 characteristics of this object, such as metallic. There was an absence of trail, like a smoke trail, circular or elliptical in shape. Several reports of well-kept formation flights varying from 3 to 9 objects. The 5th one was normally no associated skunk except in 3 instances a substantial rumbling roar was noted. And the 6th was level flight speeds normally above 300 knots are estimated. This is in a government document that is to an Air Force general in 1947. The second government document that I was able to find was from the FBI, and I want to read, it's actually dated January 31st, 1949, and it's from the FBI, and it starts off by saying, at recent weekly intelligence conferences of the G2, ONI, OSA, and FBI in the 4th Army area, officers of G2, 4th Army have discussed the letter of unidentified aircraft or unidentified aerial phenomenon, otherwise known as flying discs, flying saucers, and balls of fire. This matter is considered top secret by intelligence officers of both the Army and the Air Forces. He starts off his memorandum by saying that anything dealing with flying saucers, balls of fire, or flying discs are top secret. So obviously they were keeping something top secret back then in 1947. The third government document that I have is dated actually December 2nd, 1952. And I just want to take you back a little bit to 1952. At that time, for some reason, there was an exorbitant amount of UFO reports that were going on. I don't know what it was. Maybe after the crash of 1947, folks were, I guess, more apt to looking up into the sky and noticing these things. But the entire nation had an increase in these reports. Both civilians and within the military actually were reporting this. And this document that I have here, this government document that's dated December 2nd, 1952, is from the director of the scientific intelligence at the CIA to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So it's basically a letter from a subordinate to the main guy who's in charge of the CIA. And the main guy at that time in 1952 was Walter Beadle Smith. And in paragraph 4 of this document, he states, recent reports researching CIA, it's very hard to type on this letter because it's from an old typewriter, I'm assuming. So I'm trying to read this as best as I can. Recent reports researching CIA indicated that further actions was desirable, and another briefing by the A2 and ATIC personnel was held on the 25th of November. At this time, the reports of incidents convince us that there is something going on that must have immediate attention. The details of some of these incidents have been discussed by ADSI with DDCI. Sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomenon or known types of aerial vehicles. This is coming from an employee within the CIA to the head of the CIA. It's basically, you sending your boss a letter saying, hey, something's going on here and we have to look into it. The fourth piece of document that I have that I wanted to share with everybody and with you, Lucy, is the Air Force Regulations and Policies Procedures, an excerpt from there. Now, with all of this material that I just discussed with you, we're able to see this now, and we're able to gather this information. It is public record. because of the Freedom of Information Act that was enacted in the mid-1970s. So that's basically the only reason why that we're able to see any of this was because of the Freedom of Information Act. And you're only able to get this if you petition. And somehow within the 80s and 90s, there were many, many petitions that were sent into the government to release these documents. And so therefore that's how we're able to actually physically have them in our hands right now. But I wanted to share with you this Air Force Regulations and Policies Procedures Manual. Specifically, there's a section in there, regulations governing the UFO investigation. And in paragraph 9, section 105, this is what it states. In response to local inquiries resulting from any UFO reported in the vicinity of an Air Force base, information regarding a sighting may be released to the press or the general public by the commander of the Air Force base concerned only if it has been positively identified as a familiar or known object. Follow-up queries about unexplained cases are to be referred to the Office of Information Services in the Pentagon. So basically what this is saying is that anyone within the military can only release information of any sightings that are reported within the Air Force base in the skies if it's been positively identified. Otherwise, if it has not been positively identified, it must go to the Pentagon. And we all know that once things go to the Pentagon, they're never released. They cannot be released, basically. So the only explained cases may be released to the public, and anything that is not explained is basically going to the Pentagon and is lost forever. I found these highly, highly interesting, and there's a ton, Lucy. There are a ton of these documents that are out there. You just have to dig a little bit deeper to find them. But these are basic government documents, and they're not blacked out. I can read them right now. So I just wanted to share those with you. And if you're interested in it, take a look. Go on Google. You can actually go to the Government National Archives. And if you do some digging around there, you're probably able to find these documents as well as hundreds and hundreds of more.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. But what's next? Let's see. I came across something called the Majestic 12. Do you know anything about this one, Anthony?
Yeah, as you were reviewing the government projects and studies before, I noticed you did not mention Majestic 12. This has recently come into light. It came about in the mid-1980s, but it's been swirling around the Internet and documentaries for the last 15 years. It does have an air of skepticism, but some of the aspects have been investigated and found to be true.
I can't wait for you to tell us about it.
Okay. On December of 1984, Jamie Shandera, a Hollywood film producer who also has been interested in UFOs, received some unusual information via the post office, and it was a package containing just one roll of monochrome film. The package was posted in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but had no return or sender's address. There was no accompanying letter. Shandera had the film developed and was surprised to find negatives of what appeared to be an 8-page briefing paper dated 18th of November, 1952. The first page of this paper carried a warning, top secret, eyes only, and was for the attention of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. On page 2 was a list of 12 eminent U.S. scientists, military leaders, and intelligence advisors. On page 3, the subject of the paper was stated as the recovery of a crashed flying saucer and alien bodies near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947. The final page of the briefing paper was a memorandum from President Harry Truman to his Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, instructing Forrestal to proceed with Operation Majestic 12. This memorandum was dated September 24, 1947. The paper and the memorandum showed that in 1947, a flying disc-shaped craft crashed near Roswell, and extraterrestrial biological entities was recovered by the military. President Truman was authorizing Forrestal to set up a committee to deal with the situation. In 1952, newly elected President Eisenhower is then briefed about the situation by the papers, including details of the 12-man committee, the saucer crash, and the need to avoid public panic. In 1985, researcher Bill Moore received a postcard postmarked New Zealand through the post, advising him to search some recently declassified files at the U.S. National Archives. Along with Shandera, Moore did this and found a memo confirming the existence of MJ-12, another name for the Majestic 12, along with Magic Number, written by Eisenhower's Special Assistant for National Security, Robert Cutler, addressed to National Twining, U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff. Tim Cooper, UFO researcher, received a number of MJ-12 documents, some of which were hoaxes. However, according to Cooper and fellow researcher Stanton Friedman, 2 single-page documents appeared to be genuine. The first contains brief instructions to General Nathan Twining, alleged MJ-12 member, regarding his activities during a trip to New Mexico in July 1947, the site of the crashed UFO. The second is a memo dictated by U.S. Secretary of State to his Secretary R.H. Himmelson to President Truman. The reference at the top of the memo contains Magic EO 092447 MJ-12. Then, in 1994, a researcher, Don Berliner, received an anonymous roll of film containing 23 pages of a Majestic 12 Special Operations Manual dated April 1954, containing detailed instructions entitled Extraterrestrial Entices and Technology, Recovery and Disposal. The original paper and ink of these documents cannot be analyzed because they are on film, but the factual details can be checked, such as the background of the 12 members of the MJ-12, dates and times, signatures, etc. The alleged members did indeed prove to be the cream of the U.S. intelligence, military, and scientific communities, exactly the people that could be expected to be members of a group investigating UFOs. The last surviving member of MJ-12 had died before Shandera received the original film, but the activities, correspondence, and telephone logs, etc., of the members could be investigated. The earliest reference to Majestic 12 is in the memo allegedly sent by Truman to Forrestal, names of the President's science advisor, Vannevar Bush, and is dated September 24, 1947. Investigation shows that this was the only day between May and December that Truman met with Bush. After a great deal of research, Stanton Friedman also proved that Forrestal also met with Bush that day. The 24th September in 1947 is also important because Nathan Twining, commanding general of the Air Materiel Command, sent a secret memo to the Pentagon regarding flying discs, including the words, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious," which I just mentioned before. Also, flight logs from 1947 show that Twining had flown to New Mexico on July 7, 1947. According to the original paper, this was the same day that a quote-unquote secret operation was begun to assure recovery of the wreckage for scientific study. Genuine documents or hoaxes accompanied with several coincidences. There is a lot of disagreement by experts. One of the main problems regarding the documents is the signature on the Truman document. It appears to be wrongly positioned on the page, and when compared with authentic signature, it appears to be almost exactly the same, inferring that it has been copied. Genuine or fake, the MJ-12 documents are certainly some of the most interesting documents in the history of ufology, and because of the details involved, it seems that they were faked. If they were faked, then it was done by someone with inside knowledge, perhaps someone who thought that the public had the right to be informed of the fact that the government is willfully covering up the truth about UFOs. But the lies don't end there. Following World War II, James Forrestal served as Secretary of the Navy under the Truman administration, but subsequently was made Secretary of Defense. In this position, Forrestal objected to the obsessive secrecy that was developing, especially by certain new departments such as the CIA. In fact, he lobbied for the CIA to be brought under much tighter government control. His opposition to the high levels of secrecy caused him to attract the attention of those he opposed, and when he voiced his objections to being watched, he was declared paranoid by those who were ignorant of the true facts. Forrestal was ordered to the mental ward of Bethesda Naval Hospital and was said to have suffered a nervous breakdown. He was isolated and discredited. Even his family and friends were denied permission to visit him. On May 21, 1949, Forrestal's brother informed the authorities that he intended on removing him from the hospital on the following day. In the early hours of May 22, 1949, it was later announced James Forrestal committed suicide. However, ex-Naval Intelligence Officer William Cooper maintains that James Forrestal was the victim of the peoples whose obsessive secrecy he opposed, and sometime on that fateful morning, secret agents, CIA, entered his hospital room, tied a sheet around his neck, and on the other end to the room fixture. The agents then threw Forrestal out of the window. Unfortunately, the sheet could not sustain his weight, and it tore and he plummeted to his death.
Wow. If the Majestic 12 is proven to be true and the documents authentic, then this would be the largest national government cover-up in U.S. history. I hope I'm still around when the lid gets blown off of this one. But I'm going to go even further and do an Independence Day on the White House. I want to share with everyone some of the secrets that past presidents have revealed, secrets that they have tried to keep a secret or they themselves were kept in the dark until now. Anthony, I'll discuss the first 6, and you can review the last 4, okay? First one, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, this story doesn't necessarily involve FDR, but of someone in his cabinet. The story is still being researched and investigated by the Center for UFO Studies and the Ohio MUFON, Mutual UFO Network Division. It involves the longest servicing state secretary in U.S. history, Cordell Hull. Hull won the Nobel Peace Prize for the work he did towards the creation of the United Nations. He is one of 3 Nobel Peace Prize winners who have been involved with UFOs. The other 2 are Jimmy Carter and former Canadian Prime Minister Lester Pearson. Hull's story is this. The daughter of his cousin, Reverend Turner Hamilton Holt, came forward a few years back to tell the story of an incident that occurred in Washington, D.C. in 1939. According to what the Reverend told his family, his cousin Cordell Hull had taken him to the sub-basement of the Capitol building during a visit to Washington. There, he viewed 4 large glass jars holding 4 creatures, a wrecked round craft of some kind of nearby. No other supporting evidence is available, but MUFON, Ohio is still working on it. Then there's Harry Truman. Harry Truman was, as everyone knows, the president who held the White House at the time of the Roswell crash. Despite the importance of the crash in UFO lore, there is very little evidence to be found in the White House records that show Truman had any documented involvement in the handling of the crash. A display at the Roswell Museum has a display showing a phone call and a meeting with General Hoyt Vandenberg, who is generally acknowledged to be a key player in the Roswell event. The call and the meeting were supposed to have occurred on July 9th, the day after the Roswell press release on the crash. According to White House records, however, neither occurred. Vandenberg and other possible key Roswell players did meet on July 10th, but it was only for 10 minutes, and then only for the signing of an Air Force Day proclamation. The following people were present: Honorable W. Stewart Symington, the Assistant Secretary of War; Lieutenant General Hoyt S. Vandenberg, Acting Deputy Commander; Army Air Forces Major General General James H. Doolittle. The White House records, however, might not all be that inclusive. Edwin Easley, for example, is shown in the White House records to have never had contact with Truman. Now, in direct contradiction to this, there is a statement by Easley's daughter who stated that her father had promised not to talk about after making a promise to the president. General Roger Ramey is another example of a possibly incomplete White House records. White House records show that he never had contact with the president, but yet George Filler of Filler's Files stated that Mrs. Ramey had told him during an interview that she and her husband had met with Truman and his wife on more than one occasion, and in fact, they were good friends. The oral testimony of Robert Landry, the Air Force advisor to President Truman, may also help shed light on why there is no crash saucer material or recorded contacts with Roswell participants in the White House files. Now, Landry told Truman, oral historians, that he briefed Truman on UFOs orally every 3 months during his tenure, which was February 1948 to January of 1953. He described himself as a go-between to the CIA. As a sidelight to this, Landry undoubtedly told Truman of the number of radar UFO sightings, as described in a second oral history interview, that he had while stationed with the 8th Army Air Force in Hawaii during World War II. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, as I said previously, the president only knows what is told to him by those around him. He can be cut off from knowledge, such as Harry Truman was while vice president under FDR. During his whole time as vice president, he only met with the president twice and was therefore out of the loop on almost everything that was going on. When Truman became president, he decided that the next president would not end up as president knowing nothing as he had. He set up a series of briefings to be given to the president-elect that would have him ready to govern when he was sworn in. This is a practice that continues up to the present day. Truman helped brief Eisenhower on many subjects that he would need to govern. One of those briefings is the rumored UFO briefing given to Ike in November of 1952. This briefing has become famous because of the MJ-12 document mailed to Jamie Shandera in 1984, as we mentioned earlier. Now, perhaps one of the most well-known of the presidential UFO stories. This story is the visit of Eisenhower to Palm Springs in February of 1954. It was during that visit discovered Ike had disappeared. Panic broke out, and one reporter almost got a story on the wire stating that Ike had died of a heart attack. Ike's press secretary, James Hagerty, gained control of the situation by saying Ike was at the dentist after having broken a cap eating chicken. Ike reappeared the next morning at church, and all was forgotten. All of the 1950 stories state that Ike had gone to nearby Edwards Air Force Base, and there he met with aliens who landed at the base. Ike met with the aliens. He heard their message and thereby decided that the world was not ready for this type of information. The story further states that it was at this point that Ike ordered the real cover-up to start. Now, in the late 70s and early 80s, when dead aliens became the rage, the story of Ike's visit to Edwards turned into a visit to see dead alien bodies. Although no 1950 story mentions these dead aliens, there is actually some evidence to indicate that he may have, in fact, gone to Edwards to see alien bodies. A month before Ike made his trip to Palm Springs, the APRO Bulletin published a headline story which stated, AF men examine UFO, object found near California-Oregon border. Prominent radio commentator Frank Edwards, who broke the story, stated that the object had been removed to a West Coast U.S. airfield. Now, an interesting sidelight to the story is the fact that one of the Air Force men reported to be going to the airfield to investigate the object was none other than J. Allen Hynek. Finally, related to Eisenhower is the testimony of Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin, who stated that he had been shown small UFO wreckage pieces and that Ike was fully aware of the facts. Lufkin had served with the White House Army Signal Corps. In a conversation with a reporter, Lufkin stated that Eisenhower knew what was going on and that Lufkin himself had witnessed Eisenhower talking about UFOs while at Camp David. Now on to Lyndon B. Johnson. There is a UFO connection to the 1965 power blackout in the Northeast and the role of Johnson White House in the crash of an object in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Based on the information supplied by Kecksburg expert Stan Gordon and researcher Leslie Keene, it showed the involvement of such groups as NASA, who now have agreed to turn over 36 pages of documents that have always claimed they don't have, to the Office of Emergency Planning at the crash site. At the time of the Kecksburg crash, President Johnson was at his White House ranch in Austin, Texas. A careful review of the evidence showed some interesting parallels to what Gordon had discovered about groups reported at the crash scene. These included James Webb, the head of NASA, arrived at the ranch at 9:50 in the morning after the crash. All members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff arrived the morning after the crash. The governor of Pennsylvania arrived at the ranch in the afternoon. On Sunday night, 3 days after the crash, Johnson arrived back at the White House. The next afternoon, Johnson met off the record with Buford Ellington. Ellington was the head of the Office of Emergency Planning, which is inside the Executive Office of the President. This was one of the groups that appeared to have been involved in the Kecksburg crash. One of the key people under Lionel Effington was U.S. Air Force Colonel Leo Busada. He headed up the Special Facilities Division within the Office of Emergency Planning. He is the person mentioned in the Blue Book file dealing with the Kecksburg crash. Now, I learned that Barraza had also been heavily involved in the 1965 blackout of New York City. In fact, he wrote a report to Ellington detailing his findings. Barraza's findings hinted at the possible role of UFOs in the blackout. From November 23, 1965 Barraza report, we read, the lack of specific information at the time, plus the state of confusion that existed in the Northeast U.S., the fact that sabotage, enemy action, and unknown phenomena were all considered possibilities. It turns out that Barraza was the head of Mount Weather, the nuclear attack-proof bunker outside Washington, D.C., where the president and top government leaders were taken in case of nuclear attack. In fact, on September 11th, when the trade towers were hit, the top 15 government leaders were rounded up by the Secret Service and taken there, while Cheney directed things in the bunker under the White House. Barraza, who was at Mount Weather, had instant access to the Joint Chiefs of Staff Command Center, all the military services, fire departments, NORAD, and other key agencies, was involved in the Kecksburg recovery and may have actually been directing the proper units to the site behind the scenes. Aerial photographs of Mount Weather show the presidential heliport where the president is dropped off. The tower that directs the president's flight is known as Bluegrass Tower. In the Kecksburg Blue Book file, right after J. Leo Barraza's name, you will find Code Bluegrass. Another connection to the Code Bluegrass is the Paranormal CIA project started in 1955, which has not been confirmed. Another person who adds evidence to this role in the Mount Weather in UFOs was Brigadier General Stephen Lovkin, who testified for the briefings held by CSETI, the Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, for congressmen and others in April 1997. He stated, I was fortunate enough to travel around Washington, D.C. area, and I was fortunate enough to speak with one individual who was a government employee. He was not military. I only knew him as Frank, and I first met him at Mount Weather, Virginia, Winchester, which is the place that many of you might know where the president was in case of attack. He told me at that time, the first time that I saw him, because I knew I was interested in the subject matter, that this place also had facilities to track these UFOs. Now, finally, I should mention a final note on the Special Facilities Division. In 1996, in a story, former U.S. Air Force physicist Robert Collins posted a chart and a letter to the Internet following the release of Independence Day. As part of that posting, Collins made the following interesting comment. The following has been uncovered over the years of research. MJ-12 had a cover under which it operated, and that cover was reportedly the Office of Emergency Preparedness, Special Facilities Division. Richard Nixon, yes, Richard Nixon. President Nixon gave Jackie Gleason of the Honeymooners access to dead alien bodies. 3 separate people claimed to have been told the story by Nixon: Bill Nell, Larry Warren, and Beverly Gleason. The key witness of these 3 was Beverly Gleason, the second wife of the comedy superstar. We have proof that she wrote a version of the story for the National Enquirer in 1983, 4 years before Gleason's death. It is a story that Beverly said made Jackie very angry. The gist of the story is that Gleason was friends with Nixon. He lived in Miami, Florida, near Nixon's southern White House at Key Biscayne. Gleason saw the bodies late one night at Homestead Air Force Base in 1973, which was close to both men's homes. It was also the base where Nixon flew on his 92 trips to the southern White House. There is very little supporting evidence other than what Beverly Gleason and the other 2 witnesses claimed Gleason told them about the event. Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, as most people know, was involved in the big flap of UFO sightings in Michigan in the mid-60s. He helped initiate a congressional look at the UFO problem. Now, it's funny how quickly and dramatically opinions can change once a person enters the White House. I'm going to read a short transcript from the March 26, 1966 show, Face the Nation, and it's between the host and President-elect Ford. Question: Mr. Ford, what about flying saucers? We've had some in Michigan in the past week. Do you really believe in flying saucers? You've called for a congressional investigation. Ford: Dave, we've had several incidents in Michigan in the last week, incidents that many reliable good citizens felt were sufficient to justify some action by our government, and not the kind of flippant answer given by the Air Force where it's passed off for some swamp gas. In addition, there are other incidents that happen from time to time, reported by people I think are basically fully sincere and honest. It seems to me that this mystery, which has been around the country with all these various sightings, does require that Congress take a good look at it. They should bring up these witnesses from Air Force and NASA and have them interrogated by members of a House of Senate committee. Let them put their records on the line and let the people who have seen these unidentified flying objects come and testify. I think the American people would be more assured that there were or were not if a public hearing were held. Ford did nothing on the UFO front once he became president or after. It naturally leads to the question of whether there is a briefing given which all changes the president's mind about releasing confirming evidence of UFOs.
So now on to Jimmy Carter. It has always been questioned whether Jimmy Carter was told much about evidence such as crash saucers because he had run his campaign against the Washington insiders. He also got into trouble a couple of times with the U.S. military, such as when he cut the defense budget, canceled the B-1 bomber, and leaked the stealth fighter secret. The evidence now seems to indicate Carter was told and may actually have been told about the crash saucers. Now, as background for those of you who do not know Jimmy Carter had seen a UFO, here is his version of the event. He has spoken of the sighting many times. There were about 20 of us standing outside of a little restaurant, I believe, or a high school lunchroom, and a kind of green light appeared in the western sky. This was right after sundown. It got brighter and brighter, and eventually it disappeared. It didn't have a solid substance to it. It was just a very peculiar-looking light. None of us could understand what it was. I never made fun of other people who have seen things of that kind. This admission of a sighting and a promise Carter made during the campaign to release all UFO information led to the deluge of 9,000 UFO letters into the White House on UFOs. What most people don't know about the Carter promise is that there was an exception, which I believe relates directly to the crash saucer subject being discussed here today. Carter made an exception saying he would not release UFO records with national security implications. Here's what he said. I don't believe in keeping information like that secret, but there may be some aspects of the UFO information with which I am not familiar with might be related to some secret experiments that we were doing that involved national security, a new weapon system. I surely wouldn't release that, but if it was something removed from a national security, then I, as president, would go ahead and release it. I see nothing wrong with that. In a related story, we have the story of George Bush UFO briefing of President-elect Carter. According to Marcia Smith, a researcher at the Library of Congress, when Carter asked for the files, then CIA Director Bush said Carter did not have the need to know, that being president was not sufficient, quote-unquote, need to know. He would have to go to Congress and get that requested UFO documents declassified. An even more important story comes from the prominent civil rights attorney, Daniel Sheehan. He was called in by Marcia Smith as a consultant on 2 studies she was preparing for President Jimmy Carter. One study was on UFOs, and the second was on extraterrestrial intelligence. Sheehan is famous for his legal work on the Pentagon Papers, the Karen Silkwood case, Iran-Contra, and several other important cases. Sheehan's story is that he gained access to the classified Blue Book files through the efforts of Marcia Smith. In a vault in the basement of the Madison Building in Washington, D.C., Sheehan found pictures of a crashed flying saucer. This is information he reported back to Smith. Smith, in turn, would have undoubtedly have related this discovery to the president in her story. Here is Sheehan's account. Back in 1977, when I was asked to participate as a special consultant to the Library of Congress Research Group analysis for President Carter, I was given access to the Project Blue Book files, the classified sections of them in preparation for a seminar I was asked to present to the top 50 scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California in the SETI program on the religious implications of extraterrestrial contact. In that context, I was allowed to review the classified second of the Blue Book project. Further evidence that Carter was briefed and told of UFOs and crash saucers came from a leaked document that was put out by Bill Moore in the late 1980s. It purports to be notes related to a UFO briefing given to Carter on June 14, 1977. On to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a president who was interested in the paranormal. Any number of stories could be told about his comments on the White House ghost or the fact that he claimed his father spoke to him during his funeral. The Reagan White House actually had people hired to keep Reagan away from school children asking after speeches because, as Merlin Fitzwater said, the goddamnedest things would come out of his mouth. Reagan had 2 UFO sightings. There are a couple of quick crash saucer-related stories that I would like to share. The first centers on the visit of Steven Spielberg to the White House in June 1982 to screen E.T., the extraterrestrial, to Reagan and 36 other people. The story of E.T. is actually a fictionalized version of the live alien story that has been circulated by U.S. intelligence inside the UFO community many times over the last 55 years. As the story goes, a live alien was recovered from a crash in the late 1940s, and it died in captivity in 1952. Reagan sat beside Spielberg during the screening. According to the story that Spielberg told to the film producer Jamie Shandera, near the end of the screening, Reagan leaned over to Spielberg and stated, "I bet there aren't 6 people in this whole room who know how true this all is." Spielberg was shocked by this statement, but was unable to get future details from the president as Reagan left for bed as soon as it was over. A couple of months after seeing E.T., the extraterrestrial, President Reagan made an appearance at the old Roswell Army Air Force Base. There, in front of the West Hangar, where the bodies and craft passed from the Roswell crash were rumored to have been held for a short period of time before being shipped to Air Force Base, Reagan made a campaign speech for Senator Harrison Schmitt, then running for re-election. In case you were wondering, Reagan did mention E.T. in the speech. As a side note to the Vice President, Dick Cheney also showed up at the Roswell base to make a speech in 1992. Cheney has long been rumored to be an inside player on the critical information such as crash saucers. So I have put him in my UFO Most Wanted deck of King of Clubs. Another Reagan story is the involvement and knowledge of Frank Carlucci, a key person in the military-industrial complex and Reagan's former national security advisor. One of Steve Greer's disclosure witnesses tells of Carlucci being a key figure in a top-secret air show at Norton Air Force Base in 1988, where an alien reproduction vehicle was shown off. Finally, on Reagan, let me quickly discuss former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Powell was Reagan's last national security advisor. He told presidential historian Lou Cannon that one of his roles in the Reagan White House was to keep the alien references out of Reagan's speeches. He stated he worked hard to keep the alien invasion remarks out lest people think there actually was an alien invasion. Powell stated that whenever Reagan brought up aliens in meetings, he would roll his keys and whisper to his colleagues, "Here comes little green men again." Powell stated further that the concept of Star Wars was an idea that Reagan got from the 1951 movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now billions are being spent on that idea. Bill Clinton. Clinton, like Jimmy Carter, had problems with the military. He, like Jimmy Carter, had also run as a Washington outsider against the Washington insiders. He referred to them as the fucking Washington crowd. He should therefore not have been surprised when the Washington insiders who told the UFO secrets chose not to play ball with Clinton. Clinton did many things which upset the military, such as appearing to dodge the Vietnam War and making a promise to put gays in the military. It was these kinds of things that have led to the idea that Clinton may have been cut out of the UFO situation. One of the stories that has been told to support this idea is the story told by Dr. Stephen Greer about the late White House reporter Sarah McClendon and her question to Clinton about UFOs. Here's what Greer said on the Art Bell Show. "You know, Bill Clinton leaned over and told Sarah McClendon, who hosted us at the National Press Club on May 9th, this is a story I haven't told, and I'm going to tell you now. She told me this. Bill Clinton leaned over to her and said, because she brought up this issue to Bill Clinton, saying, 'Why don't you do something about what Dr. Greer and this group are trying to do?' He bent over and he said, 'Sarah, there's a secret government within the government, and I don't control it.'" The Clinton-Roswell crash story started just after Clinton entered the White House in 1983. Billionaire Lawrence Rockefeller had seen a documentary on Roswell. He was amazed by what he saw. He decided it was time to go to the president and get him to declassify all UFO files, despite warnings from researchers such as Bud Hopkins, who were telling him that this was how it worked. Rockefeller's presidential effort was cut off at the pass by Bill Clinton's science advisor, Dr. Jack Gibbons, a self-acclaimed UFO skeptic. Gibbons handled Rockefeller's questions and concerns related to declassifying the UFO files from 1993 to 1996. Gibbons told Rockefeller that the request to declassify all UFO files would be impossible if the cover-up was as widespread as Rockefeller was claiming. Gibbons proposed taking one case and trying to get it declassified. They would then have a pattern to follow. Rockefeller thought about it and said that this one case idea would be fine. He was choosing the Roswell case. Thus began a move to get the facts on Roswell. The USAF, United States Air Force, started their study on what really happened in 1947. Bill and Hillary Clinton are most well known for their interest in UFOs and their efforts to get to the bottom of the Roswell crash. Looking back at the 1,000 pages of UFO material that were released by the Clinton White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, it appears that Hillary may have been dealing with the UFO issue for the president. The OSTP files reveal that much of the Rockefeller effort to declassify the Roswell case was being passed through Hillary Clinton's office in the West Wing of the White House. In a November 1st, 1995 letter from Rockefeller's lawyer Henry Diamond to Dr. Gibbons, Diamond discussed a draft letter to the president on UFO disclosure that he felt it was now time for the president to see. Further, Diamond talked about how Mrs. Clinton and her staff had been helping Lawrence Rockefeller to edit the UFO letter to the president. In a second letter written by Lawrence Rockefeller to Dr. Gibbons, Rockefeller stated, "You indicated that you will keep the First Lady's office informed, and we shall as well. As I have said, President Clinton was very interested in the Roswell crash. It was even known that he had a book on Roswell in his private library. Some of his top officials, however, claimed to be ignorant of Roswell. One such official was Anthony Lake, who was speechless when asked a question about Roswell on the Diane Rem Washington, D.C. talk show. Diane Rem was forced to go to commercial to bail him out. In a second appearance on the show, Lake talked about Roswell. He made the claim that he, as a national security advisor to the president, was out of the loop." Just 1 minute. I would like to thank you for saving, if not my life, at least some embarrassment when I once did this show. I think it was the second caller who called in and asked me about Roswell Air Base, and there was this stunned blank look on my face. I had no idea what he was talking about. you said very generously, it's time to take a break. Over the break, you explained to me that we might or might not be keeping an alien at Roswell Air Force Base. I had never before been led into this conspiracy, even as National Security Advisor, so I didn't know what to say. I tried to prove a negative afterwards that there was no alien being held there. What I should have said is that, in fact, the alien does not look anything like the alien in Independence Day, the movie. Anyway, I want to thank you for stepping in. Anyway, in response to the push by the White House, the United States Air Force Headquarters released their report on the Roswell crash in late 1995. It was titled The Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. It concluded that there was nothing to the alien spaceship theory. President Clinton was not amused. In a speech on November 30th, 1995, he answered back to the United States Air Force. It was a speech given in Belfast, Northern Ireland, in front of 80,000 people, and I can assure you, nothing gets in a presidential speech that is not there for a specific reason. There had been a letter-writing competition in Northern Ireland. School children wrote letters to the visiting U.S. president, and the two winning letter writers were on the stage with Clinton during his speech. Neither of their letters, however, was read. Instead, Clinton answered a letter from Ryan, who was asking about Roswell. This is what Clinton stated. I got a letter from 13-year-old Ryan from Belfast. Now, Ryan, if you're out in the crowd tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. A couple of days following this speech, the Air Force published a news story on the release of the United States Air Force Roswell report. They quoted that the above Clinton statement, stating that he had therefore agreed with the United States Air Force conclusion. Nothing could be farther from the truth. As with any argument, it is only as strong as the facts one wishes to leave out. Here is the very next line of what Clinton said in the speech. It was clear on shot across the bow of the Air Force stating that he wanted more answers. And I quote, "And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did not recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know." So in 1997, the United States Air Force decided to screw the president with yet another Roswell report, this one called the Roswell Report Case Closed. Answering the president's orders that he wanted to know about the bodies, the Air Force spent much of the report dreaming up the bizarre notion that dummies dropped in 1953 explain why people in 1947 were reporting bodies in connection with the Roswell crash. Now we're up to George W. Bush. My final story is a key story dealing with the role in the inside workings of the UFO story as it applies to Vice President Dick Cheney, former Vice President Dick Cheney. Cheney has held many key government positions, has been tied into the military-industrial complex for years, and has been the focal point of many stories dealing with Area 51 and crashed saucers. In April 2001, just after entering the White House, Cheney was on the Diane Rem talk show. He was on the Diane Rem talk show announcing that the U.S. had just recovered a plane from China that the Chinese had shot down, claiming to be a spy plane. Cheney was in a victorious mood until the questions started. The question was asked, "Good morning, Mr. Cheney. I have a question. Since a statement made by George Bush last July, there has been a vicious rumor in the UFO community that you have been read into the UFO program. My question to you is, in any of your government jobs, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And if you have, when was it and what were you told?" Cheney replied, "Well, if I had been briefed on that, I'm sure it would have been classified, and I couldn't talk about it." Host question, "Is there an investigation going on within this administration, Mr. Vice President, with regards to UFOs?" Cheney answers, "I have not come across the subject since I've been back. I guess it's January 20th. I've been in a lot of meetings, but I don't recall one on UFOs." Cheney has always been considered to be a smart man, but he slipped up on this answer. This is probably because he was not expecting the question. The government has always stated that all UFO material has been released and that there is no cover-up. Cheney, however, clearly stated that the subject was, quote-unquote, probably classified. If it is classified, then there are documents. If there are documents, the government has not released them, and we have been lied to. There is a cover-up. You know, just this past August in 2011, the UK Ministry of Defense released 34 files totaling 9,000 pages of documents covering the years 1985 to 2007, where records show a national UK cover-up and downplaying any and all claims of UFOs. The release comes at the same time that Nick Pope, the official in charge of the Ministry of Defense, apologizes for the years of ridicule and humiliation he and his department caused the people of the United Kingdom. Why can't our government do the same? What are they afraid of?
Are we still on the air? Did the government shut our show down?
No, I don't think so, but if Men in Black come visit me tonight, it was nice knowing you all.
You know, I think this has been a fascinating show. I know there are volumes and volumes of more research and evidence to the conspiracy theory, but at least we were able to bring to our listeners some of the most critical and controversial pieces out there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed tonight's show, and I hope I was too direct. I hope I wasn't too direct and too harsh. But this type of stuff really bothers me. If there's one thing I hate, is being lied to and made to be a fool. You know, we as Americans are not fools. We demand the truth about everything, whether it hurts us or it helps us. Living in a fantasy world where things are kept in the dark is not living. So what if UFOs exist? At least I would know and willingly cough up my hard-earned tax dollars for more research and studies. But don't shield my eyes and then steal my wallet. You know, Voltaire once said, "It's dangerous to be right in matters where established men are wrong."
I like when you get fired up, Anthony. It gets me going and a little fierce on some things.
Well, before we get in any more trouble, let's end the show. I want to thank everyone for listening, and thank you, Lucy, for co-hosting another great show with me. Looks like 2012 is going to be an explosive year for us on Paranormal Review Radio. I hope you all enjoyed the show tonight, and if you have any questions, visit us on Facebook at Paranormal Review Radio, or send us an email at paranormalreviewradio@yahoo.com. Lucy, why don't you tell us what's on for next week?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank everyone for spending time with us. You know, we love having you join us each week. Anthony, thank you again for another awesome show. Next week, make sure all of you are here as we're going to explore the subject of shadow people. In addition to that, we're also going to introduce our first installment of Paranormal News. So you don't want to miss it. Last of all, welcome to 2012, everyone. We hope you spend some quality time with us this year. It's going to be awesome. So on that note, we'll see you next week, and good night.
Paranormal Review.